Hey there Wargamers, Austin here with Death Ray Designs, and here on the 4th day of Christmas, we're going to speed paint some Deadbolt's Derelict. It can sometimes be a daunting task to paint an entire table of terrain, especially when there's lots of individual pieces to be addressed. So in this video, we're going to talk about a handful of techniques and easy to find and inexpensive materials to accomplish some really nice looking effects for your table. On these pieces, these are essentially some of the pieces from the Deadbolt's Derelict corridor set. We've got a few different styles of wall, and then we've got some columns to interlock them together. On these, you've got a lot of raised detail that'll give you plenty of opportunities for dry brushing or getting darker paint on the underside and lighter paint on top to create the illusion of shadows. On the columns, you've got these light fixtures, which would be a great opportunity for OSL effects if you're not necessarily on a super time budget, and some other places where you could do some masking to do some quick definition and differentiation of different materials. So you may have noticed these are already primed. We use the Krylon Pro Enamel primer on these, but you can use almost any flat black enamel primer out there or just flat black enamel spray paint. We find that the enamel really binds to the MDF better and seals it in so that you don't keep absorbing paint throughout the paint process. Some of the other materials that we're going to be using today are kind of a medium brown spray paint. This is Nutmeg, the 2X Painter's Touch Ultra Coat Rust-Oleum stuff, and we're going to be using peach. It's not particularly peachy in my opinion. It's kind of a off-white beige kind of color. So using this for shadows and this for the lighter areas. And this is a slightly more specialty paint. This is Krylon Sea Glass, and I think it's Amber Sea Glass. We found this at a local hardware store, but you may have to order it on Amazon because I haven't been able to find much of it since the time that I bought it. For those of you familiar with airbrush paints, this is kind of like a candy coat in a spray paint can. So it's a translucent paint so that you can do some layering effects with your spray paint without necessarily trying to find intermediate colors. It goes on top and just retints everything, and that's an amazing find just because most spray paint is really opaque, and this goes on really smooth, and you'll see what it'll do for us in just a second here. So our first step is going to be using this darker brown on our walls. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to explain a little bit of what I'm going to do before we do it, just so you know what we're getting into. So because you want it on the undersides of things, we're going to flip these over and do a quick coat over most of the spots that we think are going to be this dark brown. So right along the bottom a little bit, on the undersides of this top, so that you get some shadows built up in places where shadows would naturally occur if you had overhead light. Let's go ahead and do that. So I got everything flipped over, and you want to make sure not to get so much on here that it starts to fill in the details. You just want to get a quick coat on here. This can be a little bit speckledy and messy on this first run. That's okay. We're going to have a couple more coats down, and it's going to look a lot more solid after that. And you can honestly leave a little bit of the black primer showing too. It's just going to add texture in sort of the sublayer, and having some black in the shadowed recesses is not a bad thing. So once you've got this first layer down, you see you've got like a whole bunch of paint just sitting on your surface. If you're not wanting to wait to put the next group down, you might want to wipe it up just so that you don't get puddles of paint on the tops of the things that you're about to set down. If we were doing the tops first and you were setting the bottoms on, it wouldn't be as big a deal, but you don't want to get paint caked in on the surface that you're going to be looking at all the time. So now I got the first coat down, and it's time to wait for the paint to dry, but let's help it along some. I keep this hair dryer at my paint station all the time because I'm super impatient when it comes to any kind of paint drying. It's the most painful thing ever, especially when you're in a hurry. If you got a whole table of terrain to paint, there's nothing worse than having to take a 15-minute break for paint to dry every 20 minutes. So let's speed this along and get back to painting. So we've got our beige color, the matte sweet peach. I'm just gonna start dusting. We wanna keep the can moving. I'm starting at the top here and just getting the tops covered. And then inevitably you're gonna get some down the sides, but we're gonna try to keep it to the top half so that as we're going, we're not getting too much towards the bottom where it's supposed to be more in shadows. Okay, so let's start spinning these guys around. I'm gonna do a full 180 at first, and then we'll come back and get the other two sides. When you're painting terrain that's got a lot of different sides and facets, it's always important to pick them up and look at them and spin them around and make sure that you've gotten all the angles, because there's nothing worse than moving on to the next step after you've cleaned up your airbrush or put away paints, and realizing that you've got big chunks somewhere on the underside of something that never got any paint from the previous step. Okay. Like you can guess, I'm trying very hard not to cover up all of the texture from the previous steps here. We want to leave a little bit of that coloration down here at the bottom. That's really what's going to help sell this transition. If it's just this off-white color, then you might as well have just painted it the off-white color from the beginning. So while those are drying, we'll move on to the walls. And now, because we're working on the tops and it's just the bottoms being exposed to the paper, I'm not going to worry about wiping down the whole mat again. So once again, just getting the tops of these. Getting the upper sides. And let's flip these guys around. Okay, those are looking good. Look at the edges too. You'll probably never see the edges, you know, when you've got the columns attached, but better safe than sorry. So this next step, we're going to use sea glass amber to add a little extra shading to the bottom here. So before we actually put it on the terrain, I want to show you generally what it does. We've got this piece of cardboard here that's got some speckles of other paint on it. So as you can see, you still see the other paint through it. It's very translucent. So once we put it on there, you'll still see some of that texture, like here on the terrain, and all the other colors will still show through a little bit, but it'll be tinted with this brown color. And I'm gonna essentially aim off the edge here, because this is a fan style spray, so it's not a cone spray. It shoots in just like a fan of paint. Because of that, we're gonna move some of this other stuff away. Here we go. So now we've got this nice sort of dirt rust color right at the bottom. And because I had it off the edge this way, we didn't get on top of that, which is the type of thing you can take advantage of if you're trying to do it, but I want that to also be brown. So we're gonna go this way and aim here so that a little bit splashes onto it. So there we go. It's a nice clean transition now, so we'll get the sides, and then we'll get that edge, and there we're there. So fast and easy, we've got essentially dirt and grime kicked up onto the sides of these walls without too much effort at all. So let's go ahead and get through the rest of these super fast. Do the same thing on all the columns here. Trying to keep it generally to the same sort of height. We don't want to bring it too high up. Keep it nice and easy. And like I said before, because this is a fan spray, or really with any kind of spray paint, if you're trying to just get a little bit at the base, you're essentially going to be aiming off the bottom. Like aim below the bottom, and the overspray will get onto the area that you want. Let's do a little bit of weathering. Weathering can be as simple or as complicated as you want it to be. In this situation, we're gonna do a really nice and easy chipping method that I love to do. You can do it with any really dark brown paint. We're talking about like almost black brown. Normally when I'm doing this in the normal painting area, I'll use Reaper Dark Shadow, but if we're gonna use just rattle cans, this is Matte Coffee Bean. You can also use the espresso color from Rust-Oleum. So I'm just gonna spray a little bit of this out onto the sheet over here. And I've got a little piece of open cell foam that I've pulled out of an old KR case. You can use any old open cell foam that you've got laying around, whether it's out of blister packs or whatever. It's a really easy to grab kind of thing. You can also get chip brushes from the hobby store or the hardware store. I'm gonna get a little bit of this dark brown paint on here. I've also torn it up a little bit so that it's not got hard edges on it anymore. And we're just gonna start applying it to some of the edges. We're just gonna find some outward facing edges, places where you might imagine things getting scraped up or dinged, and we're just gonna apply a little bit. You can do too much of this pretty easily, but some light touches here and there will give the illusion of paint chipping away, especially down near the bottom where you could imagine things moving around, people kicking it or dragging something right up against it. You can even get stuff onto the surface itself. A little bit of that here and there really helps. So on top maybe, we can find a couple of spots where we can get just a little bit of that kind of chipping going on. Like I said, I like to stick to places that are protruding, things that might catch something as it passes by. And each one of these walls has some slightly different textures on it, so you can experiment with different placements for the chipping, different types of corrosion. Like let's say, for example, on this guy, you could have, you know, all of the normal sorts of chipping everywhere, all over the cross beams, but then on this maybe we have some ooze coming out, or maybe just a ton of rust right under it, like water's been pouring out of that thing for forever and just corroding all of the metal beneath. We'll get on these columns as well. Most of the theory behind where we'd be placing chips is about the same. Focusing at the bottom so that it's kind of a continuation of the transition that we've got from paint to more rusty looking areas, but also focusing on the edges too, where things would catch and get scratched up. I also really like to have sort of a light ring around the top too, just because it helps blend them in with where the walls, it gives you a little bit of separation there, just so that you get a little bit of extra definition when the whole thing is assembled. One other thing I just noticed on here, there's a spot where I touched with my glove. Places like that are perfect opportunities for an extra bit of rust and chipping just to cover up mistakes. So at this point, you could probably call this set done. With the whole set of it out on the table, this would look great just as is. Now, there's a few other steps that you could do to really add some extra detail if you wanted to take the time. But as this was a speed painting video, I wanted to show you some fast and easy techniques. If you did want to take those extra steps, you could do some dry brushing to really help the edges pop. You could do some masking tape or frisket film, along with an airbrush to add some different tones in some different places and add depth. Or you could add some OSL on the lights, or even just a simple yellow over the whole light fixture and a dry brush of white would really do the job too. But for now, we've got a really solid, easy to execute, good looking paint scheme. Looks great on the table, and you're finished with your entire table of terrain in no time at all. You can use these techniques on this set or just about anything. What are your favorite speed painting techniques? Let us know in the comments down below. We'd love to know what your secret voodoo is for your terrain. So with that, I want to say thank you for watching. We hope that you'll check out the other videos in this series. We've got a few so far, and there'll be a new one tomorrow in the 12 Days series. You can also check out all the terrain and products that we use in these videos over at deathraydesigns.com/12days. During the event, we're going to have special pricing on everything, so go check them out. So thank you again for watching. We hope that you enjoyed the video. And until next time, happy wargaming.